Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining today. Today, we'll talk about our predictions for North America. Most of the discussion will be done by Bryan Gildenberg, Managing Director for Retail Cities in North America. I just wanted to say a few introductory words about Retail Cities before we kick off. And while we're saying those introductory words, just make sure you can see the Q&A button. We would like this to be interactive, so feel free to ask questions as we go. Bryan, introductory slide, please. So some of you may be visiting Retail Cities for the first time. Some of you may have already met us before. I just wanted to say a few words about what we're trying to do in 2023. Firstly, we're a network of experts. These are people who are pretty famous in their own right in the industry, have worked 15, 20, 30 years in the industry. And they're supported by a rigorous business intelligence research team. Our goal is to help those people, yourselves, other people in the industry, align to future growth. And so today's topic will be just about that, where we see the growth coming from in North American retail in the next 12 months. There's one thing I wanted to mention, which is we know that everybody's got more tasks, more jobs than they've ever had before. Everybody's in a hurry to try and get things done. And so one of the things that we're trying to do at Retail Cities is deliver quick assist services that we think you'll enjoy them. Feel free to set up a demonstration of that by emailing one of us after you see today's presentation. So without any further delay, here's Bryan Gildenberg.
And thank you, Ray. And well, good morning or early afternoon to those of you in the United States, and late afternoon to anybody tuning in from other parts of the world. As Ray mentioned, I'm Bryan Gildenberg, the Managing Director for Retail Cities North America, and going to try to give you in the next 22 minutes or so, sort of a quick overview of where we see the U.S. landscape and some of the opportunities and headwinds in here. The overarching theme here, which we picked on granularity versus narrative, is that I do think that right now, when you're looking at the retail landscape, the overwhelming narrative that we're all kind of subject to is the economy and what's going to happen to consumer purchasing behavior, purchasing power, and then what happens to retail on the other end of that. You know, the U.S. has seen inflation, which is nothing like some of the markets in Europe, but has been quite severe for here because the U.S. market is not one that's been accustomed to inflation much over the last 20, 25 years. So from a business planning point of view, you've got a number of people that have never been through an inflationary cycle before that are trying to figure it all out. There's an enormous amount of conversation today about a potential economic downturn. My fear and hypothesis is that a lot of that is being driven by people that want interest rates to come down, and that they're the people that have a microphone in the business world, so that you're hearing perhaps a lot more about recession than the data would probably reveal otherwise. My favorite quote on this was Scott Kirby from United Airlines, the CEO, who said on CNBC, he goes, "Look, if I didn't watch your network, the word recession wouldn't be in my vocabulary. I don't know what you're talking about." So for all that, I think that what you're going to find for the next few years is the U.S. will stubbornly refuse to be one place and will instead be a series of places, some of which present enormous pockets of opportunity as well as challenge. So let's take a little bit of a look at that granularity. But first, before we do that, at Retail Cities, Ray mentioned the network of global folks that we've got. And we've also got some big global ideas here, and I'm not going to dwell on all of these too much. But these are some of the big themes that we see going across all of the markets of the world that are perhaps being undersold a little bit when you look at some of the broader base narrative that you hear right now about the challenges in the short-term trading environment. The first of which is old money, and then the increasing correlation between GDP per capita and the median age of the country, and how older shoppers, quote unquote, are going to digitize or continue to use the digital landscape for shopping. Market level variability, oversimplification equals failure. I think this is one of the things that I think in particular American divisions of companies struggle with more than your European or Asian colleagues who are used to having to deal with a number of different markets with different realities and different footprints. There's a tendency to want to get to one answer in the US that I don't think is going to help very much over the next 2 or 3 years, given how different the experience of different parts of the US and different pockets of the marketplace may be. China's going to recover slowly. I think most of the wise people I know on China anticipate its recovery in the back half of the year. In the US, you've obviously got a fair amount of geopolitical complexity with China that will have two words, nearshoring and onshoring, re-enter our vocabulary or enter our vocabulary for the first time as companies look to grapple with perhaps an overdependence on China from a supply chain point of view. And that overdependence right now, we think, will moderate a little bit as companies try to bring manufacturing capability back closer to this marketplace. And whether that's in the US itself or whether it's in Mexico or Latin America, I think you'll see a lot of that. Retail profits are getting squeezed. Costs are simply rising faster than revenues for retailers. And we all think about rising prices, but rising prices are where they really manifest themselves to the retailers. They're in rising costs. And trying to build an economic model that was already becoming structurally less profitable with the rise of e-commerce, the need to inject new revenue streams into that model becomes more acute. And I think is one of the reasons why you'll see retail media continue to accelerate as a profit stream for retailers as they seek to re-reconcile their costs and expenses, their revenues and expenses, rather, a little bit more, in a little bit more of a beneficial way. The last piece, you've got this idea around capital scarcity. With interest rates going up, money is going to be harder to find, both in the private markets and the public markets. And this notion really gets you to sort of idea rationalization. And if you combine that with point number 2, where I don't have as much capital as I used to, the role of automation, we think, the role of machine learning and AI is going to be to allow your business to manage complexity when you can't deploy capital to solve the problem. And that's where the role of analytics is going to be, and the role of machine learning. How do we take these granular opportunities and make them big enough or identifiable enough quickly enough to scale? So I think when you look at inflation, these kind of basic charts look at food inflation, the CPI core, which is inflation outside of food and energy, and then energy prices. So basically, if you add these three things together, you get to the CPI, but it decomposes them a little bit. There are a couple of key themes here. Number one, food inflation still remains quite high in the US relative to other products. So you're going to see grocers get more impacted by inflationary pressure and by inflationary sales results than their non-grocery competitors. When you look at results in the US, there's always a temptation to lump Walmart and Target together because they're both mass retailers. But it's really important when you're trying to understand what's happening with Walmart and Target to understand that Walmart is a grocery store and Target really isn't, and that there's Walmart's subject to dynamics, which are way more common to grocers. Target's subject to dynamics that are more similar to a general merchant or an apparel retailer. So that mix and match is interesting. The crude oil one I put in because that line on the right-hand side is basically 2022. So that chart would be the price of oil up and down in 2022. I stretched it out for 15 years just to put it into context. For the Americans here, look, oil prices bounce around a lot, and they've historically done so. And there's nothing terribly unusual about this, to be honest. For the non-Americans on the call, it's really important to remember just how different the United States energy marketplace is from Europe's, given that we are a mostly self-reliant nation, particularly for heating fuel like natural gas. We're not going to see the same pressure in the United States that you're seeing acutely manifest itself in Europe around the cost of, say, natural gas for heating your home, where my friends and former colleagues in the UK, I was at dinner with them the other night, and they were telling me about the heat versus eat paradigm that you're seeing in the UK right now, where people are on Zoom calls in their jackets and hats because they don't want to turn their heat on because it costs too much. So that's not something you're seeing in the US right now. This simple chart on the left might be the single biggest reason why there should be pockets of optimism about the consumer landscape, because people measure consumer confidence all the time, and consumers are not confident at the moment, neither are businesses, as the chart on the right shows. The interesting thing is that consumers, if you just ask them what they think inflation is going to be over the next 12 months, are in all likelihood really wrong. And consumers' perception of inflation tends to lag actual inflation to the degree where it's quite possible that the economy in 2023, though it may not be great, is way better than consumers think it's going to be. And that may have some upside benefit for different pockets of consumers as we look at the overall retail landscape. The other thing that I think it gets underrated here when you start to think about the economic situation in the United States going forward is what I'll loosely call adaptability and switchiness. And the switchiness here is, and this comes out of some research I headed when I was in Omnicom last year, where we took a look at shopper behavior around 6 of the biggest retail markets in the world. If you compare the US grocery shopper to the global average shopper, US grocery shoppers are the switchiest shoppers on earth. And if you see here, when you look at some of the trade down dynamics, when costs went up, 33% of American shoppers traded down to a similar but cheaper product. When there was an out of stock, 46% replaced the out of stock item with a different item. That switch rate, if you will, was basically twice the global average. And I think in some ways, if you want to think about it this way, bodes well for a marketplace trying to adapt to inflation and to uncertain economic times. I think American shoppers who were always had a high propensity to change have gotten way more comfortable with switching brands, switching pack sizes, switching products. And that switchiness may help as the world gets less certain. So the defining characteristic of this year is adaptability. On the business to business side, this presents enormous opportunity to change shopper behavior. The problem we see, and this is an entirely different presentation, that most of the challenges that we see today from companies aren't around strategy necessarily, or even around, process or workflow. That there's a bunch of issues there. A lot of the issues that companies have right now in the US is that people are just tired. The adaptability and resilience and kind of dynamism of the US has led to 2.5 years in the COVID world where most American business people have had to wake up and think every single day about what they're doing, rather than just kind of fall into patterns of behaviors and unconscious pattern recognition and all the low energy requiring thinking that basically drives most of human existence. We've all had to think through everything for the first time every day for 1,000 days. And as a result, the US right now is just a pretty tired place. So the energy crisis in the US isn't about natural gas. It's about human capital and just making sure that human capital has the energy to function. There's another dynamic here, which is that Amazon, the e-commerce landscape in the United States versus other markets in the world is so much more Amazon dependent than everywhere else. It's really hard to dimensionalize. So that when you think about Amazon as an e-commerce outlet, share on Amazon tends to be fairly dynamic, not sticky. So I can't hold shelf space on Amazon the way I can hold it in another brick and mortar retailer, or honestly, even the way I can hold it on some omni-channel e-commerce sites, because of the dynamic bidding aspect to Amazon and the number of brands trying to buy opportunity on it. Holding share on Amazon is really, really challenging. And more retailers are becoming more like that. So the switchiness is going to be on the business to business side as it becomes harder to just lock consumers in, so to speak. That'll create all sorts of different conversations about how you do lock them in, which is a different topic. So when we look at this around the world, one of the things that retail cities do is try to give everybody ways to think about things that you can interpret some of the behavior that you see in other markets, and be able to interpret that back into behavior that you'd see here. So you can see here, this is just kind of a framework for some of the shopper changes we see around the world, and then some of the interesting things that you see when you look at some of the US's global, some of the other global markets around the world in terms of what they're doing to fight off inflation, which in markets like Germany and France is way more acute in some cases than it is here. So you've got Edeka, the largest German retailer, with its 7,000 products that basically they're saying, we've got everything you'd want to buy at Aldi and Lidl here, so you don't need to go to Aldi and Lidl. You've got Tesco locking in prices on over 1,000 everyday items, and Leclerc doing its 29-cent baguette, really trying to identify a key value item or KVI and locking in a price point on that. So you get some interesting things in here around whether it's comping another retailer's assortment, locking in prices for a period of time, or establishing the KVIs that frame price reference point See, all of these, I think, are really, to be honest, clearer, more explicit, and more focused ways to communicate how you're helping the shopper in an economic downturn than you typically see from a US retailer. The other big piece here is around own brand or private label. There's been a lot of conversation about this in the States. And I do think it's interesting to think about private label, not just in the context of it looks like the national brand and it's cheaper, but what you see here from Intermarché and from Lidl is in France is the ability to move shoppers out of branded everyday or mainstream product and start to aggressively promote my own private label from an eco, a bio, or an organic point of view. And what this allows you to do is something that in the US we call value tiering, which is to understand how my promotional prices get my product in front of a consumer that's used to paying a certain price for something, but maybe I can convert them with this low price now and hold on to them when economic times get better. And I think this idea here, and again, the European retailers, for the most part, have put way more time and energy into developing their more premium private label solutions, and particularly their eco-friendly or bio-friendly private brands. And this opportunity, I think, is one for both retailers and brands to think about how you might promote in an uncertain world differently to achieve a more specific business objective. The digital world yields a bunch of different ways I can save money, and whether it's being able to put together online shopping, online recipes that I can then shop easily, like Shopee does, our friends at Shopee do, or it's Misfit Market selling selling quote unquote ugly food and fruit, or whether it's Fetch Rewards. Got 17 million users of Fetch Rewards every day who are tracking purchases and trading that tracking a purchase for points, for a points-based discounting system. I think there's a huge degree to which right now the US retail environment is underestimating the resilience, adaptability, switchiness, and savvy of the shopper environment. I think there's significant opportunity for brands and retailers to price and promote way more strategically and in a way more engaging way to encourage different types of trading behavior from the shopper faced with a more challenging purchase environment. There's a couple of ideas I think you'll hear from us over the next year or so as I sort of get my arms around the retail cities research model that we've got back. And one of the things is what I'd like to call an inflation experience index. Shoppers don't really experience inflation as a year-over-year phenomenon for the most part, even though that's the way we talk about inflation all the time. They tend to experience in terms of gap between the last time I bought something and this time, and that cycle especially for consumable products tends to be more like a 30-day cycle or a 90-day cycle. So look at retail cities to be communicating what that inflation experience index looks like. Same thing's true with housing. As interest rates go up and house prices come down, what's the size of the home I can buy for the payment that I've got, to really start to think about what the impact is of rising interest rates and lowering home prices on home purchase. And then the last piece, and Tesco kind of talked about this earlier, but this idea of basket level price elasticity. How do I get people that are spending a set amount every week or every 2 weeks on groceries? How do I convince them that I can help them do that in the most effective way? It seems like retailers are leaving a lot of this basket level pricing communication on the table because the mechanics of how things get promoted in their stores is often funded by suppliers who are selling one brand at a time. Excuse me, if I were a retailer today, I'd be trying to sort this out. I just think it's interesting when you look at growth rate in the US. I've been doing retail forecasting in the United States for over a quarter of a century. Been right more often than I've been wrong, and that's not because I'm smart or anything. It's because it's not that hard to do. Typically speaking, retail growth in the United States kind of goes in a pretty consistent speed and with pretty consistent winners and losers. If you go back and look at some of the stuff that Ray and I worked on in the late 90s when we were at MBI, and you look at the retailers that were growing faster than the market in the US, probably 75% of them are the same retailers that are growing faster than the market now. And this chart here is just interesting. If you look at Amazon and Walmart's combined compound annual growth rate of 7.2% from 2010 to 2020, It's forecasted to be exactly the same compounded annual growth rate between the two of them from 2021 to 27. Obviously, Amazon slowed down because they're bigger. Walmart's accelerated with e-commerce, but the stability and consistency of the US retail landscape is an important theme for everyone to remember, that the winners here tend to keep winning, and that nothing begets success in retail like past success in terms of how that works. So if we're looking at the conclusions on the economy side, a couple of key points. A, B, C, D is sort of the way to think about this. On the A side, assess your opportunities, not just risks. If you see opportunity, it's real. This market's not going to move in lockstep, save another global catastrophe on the scale of COVID or something. This market's going to move in patches. Some of it's going to struggle, some of it's not. There will be opportunities everywhere. Just keep your eyes peeled. B is be specific with value communication. I think right now, a lot of the attempts to help shoppers deal with inflation have been kind of poorly thought out and badly structured. And I think there's a real opportunity to be way clearer about how we're communicating value. Capitalize on the shopper's adaptability and don't believe the hype. If you see strong demand, trust yourself. It's probably real. A couple of quick thoughts to wrap up here. So this chart here, which for those of you that know my other life, where I run a business called Confluencer Commerce, this is sort of the overall theme of that, which is the confluence of these three big tectonic forces, which are retail, e-commerce, omnichannel, and stores, media, search, or commerce-related, shopping-related media, digital media, and then analog. And then on the content side, commerce-centric content on layer one, long-term assets on layer three, and current assets, which are kind of the whole collection of user-generated content, PR, ratings and reviews. If there was a balance sheet of your content assets, those would be the current assets as opposed to the long-term ones. These three wheels are converging on each other, and they're creating an enormous amount of tension. If you look inside that first ring, what you'll see is a fairly typical Amazon team today, which has integrated e-commerce, search, and commerce-centric content. And they're able to navigate that, negotiate it, think about it in a pretty integrated way. Think about how long that took, how painful it was, and how many different companies and products and solutions have grown up to deal with that. I'm here to tell you that of these three convergences, levels 2.0 and 3.0, that's by a mile the easiest of the three. So we're going to be doing a lot of work on 2.0, just trying to solve this problem for the omnichannel world. And I think you've got a couple of things here, one of which is the notion of what I'll call retail media having, loosely speaking, what we call a first word problem, not a first world problem. The first word problem for retail media is that there's way too much energy being spent on the media side of it and way too little energy spent on retail. The second piece is that because in the US, so many of the retail media competencies that exist today were built for the Amazon ecosystem, that a lot of what you do with the Amazon's a river. Canoes work great. If you try to bring that canoe to the Walmart ecosystem or the Target ecosystem, you get something that looks like this, where you've just dropped a canoe in a retailer's parking lot, and it's just not going anywhere. So one of the things we'll be tackling on March 2nd, 2023, state preview, is this event that we're running called the First Word Problem, where we'll be looking at how do you bring the retail back to the retail media equation. And that, as we wrap up here a little bit, three big ideas in terms of how you're going to look at and think about targeting in this world. And again, simple acronym of ABC. A is audiences. And for those of you that haven't spent a lot of time in the media space, audiences are the lingua franca of how you target messaging in the media space. So who's the audience? How big is the audience? How do we define the audience? How do we target the audience? Skill set around audience management has become much more broad-based. The B is basket. It's entirely possible. Categories are going to be less important. And the most important thing we can do to drive the profitability of a retailer, especially an e-commerce retailer that isn't Amazon, who tries to think more than one item at a time, is around basket management. And basket management may be as important as category management going forward. And that context, when you're reaching somebody and what they're doing, is way more important in commerce than who they are. Some ideas here around the notion that we're going to be looking very carefully at the way in which retail business models are changing and evolving. and moving away from being just pure retail only business models to being media platforms or healthcare companies or content companies or whatever it is. And you're going to see more and more of this blurring of the lines between retail and other businesses. And it would not surprise us at all as we forecast out to 2025 or 2030 for half of all your business or more in a country like the US to be sold through retailers for whom retail is not their primary way of making money, and that they use retail as part of their portfolio to bring shoppers in to do other things with those shoppers. So the conclusions: better, granular, and more relevant insights are going to be critical. We're here to help. The rest of the world is often solving retail problems in way more creative ways, and we're really here to help you understand that and to be able to contextualize what you see around the world and interpret and bring it into the US. A number of you are going to be next to or part of teams like your global marketing teams or your global media teams or your global media partners or agency partners or whatever it is. And there's going to be a lot more interest, we think, at a headquarters level inside of most CPG companies in the global retail landscape. You're going to have a lot of people trying to understand 220 retail markets around the world that don't have a hope of doing that without help. So we're here to help. And you've got, I know in your companies today, you've got hundreds of people that need to understand retail better, whether it's your own sales teams, the support teams that are working with the retailers, your media and marketing teams that are increasingly looking at retail media as a way to grow brands, your supply chain teams that need to understand the demand side of the world better so they can make a better supply chain, your manufacturing teams that have to understand where the retail world is going. All of these things, if you need help explaining retail to the rest of your company, Retail Cities, we're here to help. So Ray, I'm going to kick it back to you, let you walk through the little bit of the agenda here, or I can do that if you want, but
go ahead, Bryan. Yep.
Sure. So we've got a few big events coming up for 2023. The first one I referred to earlier, the first word problem, which will be retail media seen through a retail lens. That's going to be somewhere in the New Jersey Metroplex. So stay tuned for specific details on that. We're going to do a Zoom on April 27th, a global look with a US focus on the value retail channel. So sort of do's and don'ts for 2024 planning at that point. That'll be on Zoom. The last two are going to be around, one's going to be around revenue growth management and really thinking about what that tool, how that tool and process changes in an omni-channel world, and how the principles of RGM, white space opportunity, profit management, really thoughtful channel strategy around product price architecture, how all those pieces really come to life to help drive your growth strategy. And then in November, we'll take a look at where we stand at that point in terms of the evolution and the consolidation and the development of quick commerce and other sort of last mile solutions. So those are some of the big events we're going to be running in the US. So with that, on the North America side, for those of you that have more questions about Retail Cities, please feel free to reach out to me. You can see my email there, or our head of customer development in North America, Mark Bird, who many of you know, have known over the years. Either one of us are willing and able to help. So look, we've hit up against our time here. So I'd like to thank everybody very much for their time and attention today. Ray, thank you for kicking us off and for having a great idea for a business that we get to try and grow here. This is going to be awesome.
Excellent. And happy holidays to everybody.
Yes, happy holidays to all. Take care. And to all, a good night. So take care.